I've lied a lot in my life, polished lies, strategic lies, the kind that save companies and shut down scandals. But the lie I told that night wasn't planned. It didn't come with a press release or legal backup. It came out of my mouth because three men were laughing while trying to tear the dignity off a woman who had nothing but her pride left. It was past midnight, outside a noisy lounge in Lekki, and I was supposed to be heading home in my quiet, tinted SUV. Instead, I stood still, watching her, thin, barefoot, wrapped in a cardigan that had seen too many rains. Her face was striking, even beneath the dirt and defiance. Not beautiful in the way society rewards. Beautiful in the way storms are, violent, battered, still standing. And when they touched her, when they tried to drag her down into whatever gutter they crawled from, I said it. She is my wife. The words didn't feel like mine, but they stopped everything. Then I kissed her. I didn't know her name. I didn't know where she would sleep that night. All I knew was that if I walked away, they would finish what they started. So I lied. I kissed her like she was someone who belonged to me. And for a moment, the world listened. But in Lagos, no lie stays small. And no woman like her stays invisible once power touches her skin. I thought I was saving her. I didn't know she would become the one who unraveled everything I thought I knew about love, power, and myself. Welcome to Luxurious Echoes. Make sure you like and subscribe. Let's get into the story. The night started like most of my nights do, surrounded by wealth, suits, and the sound of forced laughter bouncing off expensive glass. I had just left a networking event on Admiralty Road, the kind where everyone smelled like power and pretended not to notice it. My mother had been on the phone earlier, reminding me to smile more and drink less, as though the right balance could hide the cracks in my life. I was exhausted, not from the work, but from the maintenance, of image, of legacy, of the expectations my surname demanded. I remember pausing near the valet stand, loosening my tie and thinking, just 5 minutes of silence before I get in the car. That's when I saw them. 3 men, loud and leaning, their beer bottles swinging like weapons. And her, thin frame, dark skin nearly blending into the shadows, barefoot, wrapped in a torn gray cardigan that looked like it used to belong to someone's grandmother. She stood still, not screaming, not backing away, just watching them with those unblinking eyes. Eyes I'd come to know too well later. They called her mad, tried to tug at her arm, joked that she smelled like gutter. One of them reached for her again, and before I knew it, I stepped in. I didn't plan the words. They came out with the kind of command only Lagos respects. She is my wife, I said. My voice didn't shake. It never does when I lie. The men froze, caught between confusion and the sudden realization that I didn't belong to their level of life. My suit, my watch, my tone, it was all armor. But they didn't step away. Not yet. So I did something insane. I pulled her into me, cupped her cheek, and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't romantic. It was a shield. I remember how her body stiffened in my arms, like a deer cornered in daylight. Her lips didn't move. Mine barely touched hers. But the message was loud: this woman is mine, and if you touch her, you touch me. Lagos listens to ownership, not morality. That's the truth nobody says out loud. The men finally stepped back, muttering curses and excuses. One of them spat near her feet before they disappeared into the night. And then there was silence. Just the two of us, standing in a glow of streetlight, surrounded by scattered trash and the echo of what almost happened. Her eyes locked with mine, sharp, accusing, guarded. She didn't thank me. She just pulled herself away from my grip and walked off without a word. But I didn't move. I couldn't. That lie, she is my wife, had done more than save her. It had unraveled something in me. I don't know what I expected after that kiss. Maybe a whispered thank you. Maybe a glance of gratitude. Maybe for her to stay long enough to ask why I did it. But she didn't give me any of those things. She walked away quickly, her bare feet scraping against the concrete, her back straight, refusing to let the world see her broken. And I, Kelechi Adarimi, man of order and reputation, just stood there like an idiot with my hand still in the air. I wasn't used to not being acknowledged. In my world, people say thank you when you save them. They write emails. They bring wine. They apologize for bleeding near your shoes. But this woman? She didn't care who I was. Or maybe she did, and that's why she wanted no part of me. I watched her disappear down the road like smoke, swallowed by the night. I thought about letting her go. Letting it end right there. But something in her silence felt louder than the chaos that came before it. Something in her defiance, despite the bruises and filth, made walking away feel like cowardice, not freedom. I got into my car eventually, but I didn't drive off. Instead, I sat with the engine humming, staring at the spot she had vanished from. My phone buzzed with messages from people still at the event, pictures, jokes, gossip, but none of it felt real anymore. I replayed the kiss in my mind, not because it meant anything romantic, but because it had felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. I had made her part of my world, even for just a moment, and now that moment had a life of its own. I didn't know her name. I didn't know where she'd sleep that night. But I knew Lagos. I knew what those men would have done if I hadn't stepped in. And I knew, without a doubt, that if I hadn't kissed her, they might have come back. That kiss wasn't a fantasy, it was a warning. And it worked. But the cost? I didn't know yet. What I did know was that something had shifted. Not just in her life, but in mine. Because I wasn't the same man who had entered that lounge earlier. I was someone who had lied with purpose, who had touched pain without asking, who had created a headline before dawn. And I wasn't sure yet if I regretted it. When I woke the next morning, the first thing I saw wasn't sunlight, it was chaos. My phone had more notifications than I'd ever seen, and that's saying a lot for someone like me. Multiple group chats, news alerts, and missed calls from my assistant, my PR team, and, of course, my mother. There was no need to read everything. Just one headline told me all I needed to know. Top CEO kisses homeless woman in Lekki. She is my wife, he says. I stared at the screen like it belonged to someone else. The photo was blurry, but unmistakable, my hand on her cheek, her body stiff, our lips barely touching. The video was even worse. No audio, but my lie was now a caption millions had assigned meaning to. In less than 10 hours, I had gone from invisible businessman to viral sensation. There were hashtags, memes, speculations. People thought it was a stunt. Some thought I had a secret wife. Others thought I'd been drugged. Nobody believed it was what it really was, a desperate attempt to stop a woman from being assaulted. But then again, truth has never mattered much to Lagos. Only spectacle. I barely had time to absorb it before my office called an emergency meeting. I arrived to a boardroom filled with judgment. My head of PR wore her "I told you so" expression. My legal advisor kept muttering about damage control. My CFO suggested issuing a statement denying everything. But it was my mother's voice that cut through all of it, sharp, cold, familiar. She had called into the meeting from her estate in Ikoyi, her face large on the screen like some disapproving monarch. "Fix this, Kelechi," she said. "You embarrassed us." I opened my mouth to respond but found no words. Because no one in that room had asked about the woman. No one cared about what she went through. It was all about me. My reputation. My brand. My bottom line. And the woman? She was just a PR disaster waiting to be erased. But I couldn't erase her. Not when I could still see the outline of her spine through that torn cardigan. Not when I knew she might be in danger just because my name had touched hers. I left the meeting without promising anything. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what fixing looked like. All I knew was I had to find her. I started with the street where it happened. Lekki Phase 1, near the old lounge with flickering lights and arrogant music. I remembered the general direction she went, so I retraced her steps as best I could, walking instead of driving, wearing plain clothes instead of a suit. No cameras. No security. Just me. I asked the suya man on the corner. I asked the Kiki driver parked under the billboard. Most people shook their heads or shrugged. A few recognized me and asked for selfies. It made everything worse. By afternoon, I was exhausted. But just before dusk, a small girl selling oranges pointed down a narrow alleyway and said, "She sleeps behind the fence sometimes, Oga." I followed the path and found her, not in a room, not even under a roof, but curled beside a pile of broken wood and plastic sheeting. Her face was scraped. Her cardigan was gone. She looked smaller than I remembered, like life had shrunk her overnight. I approached slowly, and she looked up, ready to fight. I raised both hands. "I'm not here to save you," I said. "Just to ask if you're okay." She didn't say anything at first. Just stared. And then, through cracked lips, she whispered, "Why did you kiss me?" I didn't have a neat answer. I gave her the truth. Because they were going to hurt you. And because saying it wasn't enough. She didn't thank me. But she didn't spit at me either. That felt like progress. She tried to stand but winced in pain. I offered to help her to a hospital or at least somewhere clean, but she shook her head. No police. No churches. No shelters. Her voice was firm. "I don't trust anyone who says God bless you before locking the door." I respected that. I offered my car, one night only. She hesitated, then nodded. She rode in silence, curled in the back seat like she didn't want to leave marks on the upholstery. I brought her to one of my empty guest suites, not too grand, not too sterile. Just clean, with a bed and a bathroom. She walked in without comment, went straight to the corner of the room, and curled up on the floor. She didn't want the bed. She didn't want favors. She just wanted a place where nobody could touch her. That was the first time I realized she wasn't fragile. She was surviving in a world built to break her. By morning, she had set the rules. She stood at the window, arms crossed, wearing one of my old hoodies that swallowed her frame. "Don't touch me," she said. "Don't pity me. And don't talk to me like I owe you anything." Her voice was soft but edged with steel. I nodded. I didn't argue. I just asked her name. She hesitated, then said, "Zainab. But people call me Z." I repeated it out loud. Z. It didn't feel like a nickname. It felt like a survival code. She didn't ask who I was, and I didn't volunteer it. Maybe she already knew. Maybe she didn't care. She glanced around the room, inspecting everything like she'd been taught to expect traps and comfort. "I'm not staying," she said. "One night. That's all." I agreed. I offered her food, takeout from the best spot in town, but she only took a banana and kept the rest for later. Everything about her was calculated. Guarded. She sat with her back against the wall and her eyes on the door. And I, a man used to leading boardrooms, found myself asking permission before I entered the space she'd claimed. Still, I didn't leave her alone. I sat nearby, not close, just near enough to be present. She didn't talk, so I didn't either. Silence stretched between us, thick but not heavy. I watched her clean the banana peel like it was evidence. Then she said something that startled me. "They only stop when they think you belong to someone." I didn't know what to say to that. She added, "You didn't save me. You just borrowed me from danger." It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. I nodded. "I won't try to own you," I said quietly. She nodded once, slowly. That evening, when she asked to leave, I didn't stop her. But I gave her a burner phone. No tracking. Just numbers she could call if she needed. "I won't use it," she said. I believed her. But I still gave it. Because even warriors need a way out. And even liars like me need a second chance to do something right. I had assumed that getting Z into a proper shelter would solve at least part of the problem. It was supposed to be a temporary fix, a place with food, a locked gate, maybe a chance for her to breathe. My team had compiled a list of vetted women's shelters around Lagos. Clean websites, smiling volunteers, good reviews. I picked one that looked small and discreet, and drove her there myself the next evening. She didn't speak the entire ride, just clutched the burner phone like a grenade she didn't trust. The shelter was in Surulere, tucked between a clinic and a school. A security guard let us in after a short argument, and a woman with a cross necklace greeted us at the door. "You brought her here yourself?" she asked me, eyes narrowing like I was a troublemaker, not a helper. Z stayed silent, only nodding once. I filled out forms while she stood beside me like she was already preparing to run. Then something shifted. A girl in the hallway, maybe 16, made a strange face when she saw Z. Not shock. Recognition. And fear. Z noticed too. She pulled me aside, her voice low and cold. "We have to leave. Now." I didn't ask questions. I just turned, shredded the form, and led her back to the car. In silence, I drove until we were far enough from the shelter to breathe. Then I asked. Her answer came in pieces. Some shelters in Lagos aren't what they pretend to be. Some pastors collect funding but run those homes like prisons, or worse. Z had stayed in that exact 1 month ago. She remembered that girl in the hallway. She remembered the beatings, the food rationing, the night someone tried to touch her and was blamed for tempting evil. She had escaped with bruises and shame and had promised herself never again. As she told me this, I realized how little I truly understood about her world. I had walked into it with my solutions, assuming money could clean anything. But safety in Lagos isn't about gates. It's about the kind of power people don't put in brochures. I apologized, truly. Not just for taking her there, but for thinking a shelter was the same as shelter. She didn't say much in response. But later that night, I noticed she slept in the bed instead of the floor. Still curled, still tense, but something shifted. Maybe trust doesn't start with words. Maybe it starts when you show up, see the full picture, and stay anyway. The next morning, she sat by the kitchen window, legs folded beneath her, staring at the courtyard like it might speak. I didn't interrupt. I made tea, Nigerian style, hot and strong, and left it beside her. She didn't thank me, but she didn't push it away. We sat in silence for a long time. Then, slowly, she began to speak, not like someone telling a story, but like someone untangling a necklace they didn't mean to wear. Her full name was Zainab Hassan, born in Kaduna, raised in Ibadan, moved to Lagos for NYSC, and never left. She had a degree in economics. Her dream was to open a small consultancy for market women, to teach them how to scale their profits without falling into microdebt. She had once worn blouses and heels. She had once laughed without checking who was nearby. Then she paused. She didn't say what broke it. But she didn't have to. Her silence was a whole paragraph. I watched her fingers twitch slightly, then still. I didn't press. I let the silence breathe. That silence told me more than any confession. It told me she had seen things that left marks deeper than scars. Things that stripped her of voice, but not of will. I saw it in how she looked at exits before entering any room. How she memorized windows before chairs. How she checked locks twice, even in my home. That night, I stood outside her door for a long time, unsure whether to knock. I didn't want to be another man who demanded answers. So I walked away. But I started noticing things, small habits, tiny vulnerabilities. How she folded napkins like hotel staff. How she flinched when my phone rang loudly. How she never touched food until she saw me eat it first. Her trauma had rituals, and her silence was sacred. And still, something in her wanted to be known, even if just a little. She asked if I always made tea that bitter. I said yes, and she smirked. Not smiled, smirked. It felt like sunlight leaking through storm clouds. In that moment, I realized something. I wasn't protecting her because she was weak. I was drawn to her because she was strong enough to keep surviving a world that had given her every reason not to. It didn't take long before my mother summoned me. Not invited, summoned. Her estate in Ikoyi was as elegant and suffocating as ever. Marble floors, white pillars, portraits of ancestors staring like they owned time itself. She greeted me with silence and walked me straight to her private sitting room, where tea and judgment waited. "Sit," she said, without looking up. I did. The air was thick with unspoken words. Then she dropped her first bomb. "You will end whatever this nonsense is." I knew what she meant. Not the lie, not the kiss, not even the scandal. She meant Z. To her, Z wasn't a person. She was a blemish. A street girl who had clung to her son's collar like sewage to silk. My mother believed in appearance above all. Her entire life was built around curated respect. And I, her only child, was the pillar on which her empire stood. I told her I couldn't do that. That I wouldn't. She looked at me like I had spoken Yoruba backward. "You're jeopardizing everything for a charity case with dirt under her nails," she spat. I felt something break in me. Not because of what she said, but because of how familiar it felt. For years, I had obeyed. Smiled. Danced the politics. Dated the women she picked. Built a life that looked exactly how she wanted. But now, for the first time, I wanted something else, something that didn't come with approval. "Z's not yours to erase," I said, standing. "And she's not mine to discard either." My mother's face tightened like a mask cracking. "If this ruins you, don't come crawling back." Her voice was flat. Final. But for once, I didn't beg for understanding. I walked out, past the maids who avoided eye contact, past the driver who'd served us since I was a boy. I drove home alone, not because I had to, but because I needed the silence. I needed space to feel what I had never allowed myself to feel, freedom from her grip. And as I parked in front of my house, I saw Z sitting on the steps, head resting on her knees. She didn't ask what happened. She just moved aside slightly, and I sat beside her. No words. Just breath and night. For the first time, I realized she wasn't a burden. She was the reason I could finally see how heavy my life had become. We had gone nearly a week without incident. Z was still cautious, but less silent. She cleaned dishes without me asking. I let her borrow my books. There was even laughter, rare, short, but real. Then it happened. We were walking back from a pharmacy, daylight soft and harmless, when we heard them. The same men from that night. This time, bolder. One of them leaned against the car, grinning. "See, is our wife donned fresh," he mocked. Z froze. I stepped in front of her, but she grabbed my arm. "Don't," she warned. But it was too late. My instincts kicked in. I demanded they leave. I even flashed my ID card. They laughed. One of them leaned forward and whispered, "She used to be ours, Oga. You just borrowed her." That was the moment I knew this wasn't random. Someone had sent them. Someone powerful. They weren't just predators. They were messengers. I reported the incident to the police that night, but nothing happened. The officer shrugged. No evidence. No harm. No case. Z was livid. Not at them, at me. "You think shouting makes you strong?" she snapped. "You think your voice fixes everything?" I tried to explain that I couldn't just ignore threats. She scoffed. "You don't know how to survive. You only know how to win." The words cut deep. Because she was right. My entire life had been about winning, at school, at business, at image. I never learned to survive what I couldn't control. That night, we didn't speak. She locked her door. I stared at the wall, feeling useless. But the next morning, she placed a bottle of balm near my elbow. My knuckles were scraped. "You fight too clumsy," she muttered. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. I realized she didn't want me to stop protecting her. She just didn't want to be erased in the process. She had fought for her body, her life, her name, long before I showed up. I had to learn how to stand beside her, not in front of her. And that lesson? It was going to be the hardest one yet. My team was spiraling. The video hadn't vanished. It had evolved. Blog pages were reposting it as a love story. Some claimed we were secretly married. Others insisted she was blackmailing me. One magazine even called her my mystery wife from the slums. The company's shares dipped slightly. Investors got nervous. I was summoned again, this time by the executive board. They didn't ask who Z really was. They didn't care. What they wanted was control. Hire her, one of them said. Give her a role. Clean, legal, contained. It sounded neat. A staff badge, a tidy contract, maybe a uniform. A narrative they could manage. I returned home and told Z, trying to soften the edges. But the moment the words left my mouth, I saw her expression turn to stone. You want to put me on payroll? She asked. Make me your assistant? Your maid? I shook my head. No. Just something to protect you, from you, she cut in. The silence that followed was thick and bitter. She stood, pacing slowly like a caged animal. Do you know what a job is to someone like me? A leash. A deal. A way to make me disappear without bruises. I tried to reach for her, but she pulled back. I don't want your money. I want my choices. That hit me harder than I expected. Because I realized what I had done, again. I had wrapped control in kindness. Dressed it in protection. Offered it with good intentions. But underneath, it was still control. She didn't storm out. She didn't cry. She just walked into the spare room and closed the door softly. That was worse than shouting. That night, I stared at her burner phone on the kitchen counter and wondered how I had become the very thing I promised not to be. And for the first time, I admitted something out loud, to myself. I didn't just want to protect Z. I wanted her near me. But I had to learn that wanting someone didn't mean you got to own them. Not with lies. Not with money. Not even with love. Z didn't plan to tell me anything that day. We were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, the kind of quiet between us that felt almost sacred, until she broke it with a single question. Do you know what it feels like to owe someone your silence? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She wasn't asking for my input. She was peeling back a layer. Carefully. Slowly. She told me she had once been engaged to a man older than her, wealthy, connected, powerful in the kind of way that didn't need public recognition. He was a benefactor to her struggling family. Paid for her mother's dialysis. Helped cover her father's debts. Sponsored her final year in school. And in return, she was expected to smile, be grateful, and stay obedient. It started small, suggestions, curfews, comments about her clothes. Then it escalated, threats, locked doors, a slap that became routine, isolation from friends. The night she left was the night her mother died, and the man blamed her for it, said she chose freedom over family. That was how Z became both orphan and fugitive in the same breath. No money. No home. Just guilt, grief, and a man promising to ruin her if she ever spoke. I listened, my hands clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palm. Because even though she didn't say his name, I recognized the pattern. I'd met men like him at dinners, in elevators, during closed-door meetings where deals were struck and women were statistics. But it wasn't just that. As she described the company he had ties to, the holding group he sat on the board of, my blood ran cold. It was connected to my family's network. Not directly, but through shell names, offshore accounts, and partnerships that were deliberately vague. The same ecosystem that had protected my career had destroyed hers. And I hadn't known. I had never asked where our clean profits came from. I had never looked past the polished reports and branded philanthropy. Until now. I felt the urge to fix it, to call someone, to cut a deal, to clean it all up in a week. But I stopped myself. This wasn't a scandal to manage. This was Z's life. Her story. Her trauma. I simply said, "Thank you for telling me," and meant it. And in response, she did something unexpected. She nodded once and leaned her head, not on my shoulder, not on my chest, but just close enough that our arms touched. It wasn't intimacy. It was trust. Thin as a thread, but stronger than anything I'd earned with money. The vultures came circling faster than I expected. A few days after Z's story, my name appeared in a business tabloid, anonymous sources, twisted headlines, wild speculation. One piece claimed Z was my secret lover from university who'd come back to blackmail me. Another claimed I was hiding her to avoid paternity tests. It would have been laughable if it wasn't strategic. The stories weren't written for clicks, they were warnings. Someone wanted me rattled. Wanted Z discredited. My PR team begged me to go public, to deny, disassociate, maybe even pin the incident on a mental health misunderstanding. I refused. Quietly. Firmly. That same week, my corporate rival, Tund Alayemi, made a comment during a board meeting about keeping our circle clean from unnecessary entanglements. I met his gaze and understood immediately he was involved. Maybe not directly. But he had ties to the same shadow group Z's abuser came from. And now, with her in my space, I had become a liability to them. Z, on her end, kept her head low. She stayed inside, barely ate, barely slept. I noticed the way she shrank whenever my phone rang, the way she tensed whenever the news was on. She was used to being hunted. And she hated that now it was happening because of me. I tried to protect her better. I switched her burner phone. Upgraded the security system at home. Started using unmarked cars. I even began collecting evidence, gathering pieces of the puzzle, building a map of financial trails linking her past to people in my present. But through it all, I never told her what I was doing. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I knew she was tired of men doing things for her without asking. One evening, I found her sitting in the dark, clutching an old photo she'd kept folded in her sock. It was her and her mother, outside a small market stall. All I ever wanted, she said softly, was to build a life where no man could say he made me. I sat beside her, guilt sitting heavy in my chest. Because I realized, even now, she didn't want me to save her. She just wanted me not to break her further. And that was a line I had to learn to walk without falling. Z didn't invite me. She simply said, "If you really want to help, follow me tomorrow. Wear something plain." I showed up in jeans, a gray polo, no watch, no driver. We took a Kiki instead of my car. She made us get down at Mushin bus stop, and we walked. Past vendors. Past flooded gutters. Past children with bowls and mothers shouting over smoky stoves. I stayed silent, watching her navigate the chaos like muscle memory. Everyone seemed to know her, not by name, but by familiarity. The woman selling Acura gave her a warm nod. The man selling second-hand shoes handed her a plastic bag without asking. She didn't beg. She didn't boast. She simply existed, blending into a rhythm that didn't need validation. She showed me where she used to sleep before I found her, behind a locked mosque toilet, under a rusted zinc awning. She pointed at it casually, like someone showing you a coffee shop from college. "That's where I learned to pray," she said with a dry smile. "Not for miracles. Just for survival." I saw Legos through her eyes that day. I saw the cracks I had ignored, the places where wealth doesn't reach, where girls disappear and nobody blinks. We visited a woman named Mama Tope, who ran an unofficial safe house. No funding. No name. Just 3 rooms, 10 mattresses, and 20 girls who called her auntie and clung to her like lifelines. Z handed over the supplies we bought earlier, pads, soap, slippers. No speech. No drama. Just quiet giving. As we left, I asked how often she did this. She shrugged. Whenever I have more than I need. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Because I, a man with multiple properties, had never given anything that didn't come with a PR caption. And here she was, with nothing, giving from the little she stitched together. That night, back home, I didn't speak much. I simply watched her sit on the floor and clean the dirt off her borrowed slippers with a toothbrush. And I realized I wasn't falling for Z because she needed me. I was falling because she didn't. And yet, somehow, she still let me in. It happened on a Thursday evening. Power was out, and we sat in the living room lit only by a rechargeable lamp. There was music playing softly, one of her old playlists from a borrowed phone. Something soulful. Wistful. She had just laughed at something I said, full, unguarded, the kind of laugh that tilts the world a little. And in that moment, I leaned in. She didn't stop me at first. Our faces met halfway, breath mixing, eyes unsure. Then, just as our lips brushed, she froze. Not in surprise, in fear. Her whole body tensed, like something in her head snapped. "Stop," she whispered, but her voice wasn't angry. It was trembling. I pulled away instantly, hands up. "I'm sorry," I said. I thought, but she was already walking away. She locked herself in the bathroom, and I heard the water run for nearly an hour. I sat outside her door the entire time, not saying a word. Because I realized I'd crossed a line, not violently, not intentionally, but still too soon. Her body wasn't mine to guess. Her healing wasn't mine to time. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel, her eyes were red but dry. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just said, "Desire feels like danger when you've lived through both." I will never forget those words. I apologized again, not with promises, but with presence. "I'll wait," I said. "Or walk away if you want. But I won't make you feel caged." For a long time, she didn't respond. Then she nodded. Just once. And that was enough. That night, she didn't sleep in her room. She didn't sleep beside me either. She lay on the couch, between us, a space filled with quiet understanding. The next morning, she handed me tea, extra sugar. Her silent peace offering. We didn't talk about the kiss again. But something shifted. She wasn't just surviving around me anymore. She was beginning to exist with me. Not as a project. Not as a woman I wanted to fix. But as a person I was slowly, painfully, learning how to love the right way. His name was Bashir Adelik, and when he showed up at the restaurant where Z and I were quietly having lunch, everything in her went still. He didn't sit. He hovered. Smiled like a pastor, spoke like a politician. "Zainab," he said smoothly, ignoring me entirely. "You've been hiding." Z gripped the edge of the table. I placed my hand flat on the surface, not touching her, but close enough. "You should leave," I said. He looked at me, finally acknowledging my presence. "Ah, the hero." He said it like an insult wrapped in fake praise. Then, lower, he added, "You don't know what she is. What she cost people." Z stood suddenly. "Let's go," she muttered. But Bashir leaned in before we passed. "If you drag me into the light, Zainab, I'll burn everything you've tried to rebuild. You know how far my reach goes." She didn't flinch. Not until we were outside. Not until we were in the car, and I saw her hands shake uncontrollably in her lap. Back at home, I pressed for details. She didn't resist. Not anymore. Bashir had been her ex-fiancé, the one who paid her tuition, threatened her family, and locked her in a life she didn't choose. He was older. Influential. A silent partner in several companies, including a branch of my family's conglomerate. He had connections with politicians, police, pastors. He had buried girls before. Not literally, but reputationally. And now that Z was with me, visible again, his leash was tugging. I knew then that we couldn't keep hiding. Z wasn't safe in shadows. I had to choose, keep protecting her in silence, or drag this into daylight, even if it set my career on fire. If I go after him, I asked, will you stand beside me? She didn't answer right away. But her eyes, those fierce, wounded eyes, met mine with quiet certainty. Yes, she said. But don't do it for me. Do it because you finally see the kind of men you've been shaking hands with your whole life. And with that, I understood. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about accountability. Mine. Hers. Ours. The first blow came in the form of a carefully worded memo from the board. We believe it is in the best interest of the company that you address recent public controversies. The second came from my mother's voice, sharp and cold, calling from a boardroom she'd never stepped into physically but had controlled for years through whispers and bloodline. If you love this company, you'll make it clear the girl meant nothing. She said the girl, not Z. Not even that woman. Just the girl, a placeholder for a problem she didn't think deserved a name. I listened without interrupting, even as the world I'd built began to splinter. Tund Alayemi was already making moves to replace me as managing director. Investors were jittery. One of our overseas partners threatened to pull out if I didn't resolve the domestic perception issue. The perception, of course, being Z's continued presence in my life. I stood there in that meeting, watching slides about profit margins and risk optics, wondering how many of these men would flinch if they heard what Z had survived. Probably none. Later that evening, I walked into the house, expecting silence. Instead, I found Z waiting at the dining table, fingers curled around a glass of water. You look tired, she said simply. I didn't answer right away. I just sat across from her and told her everything, no edits, no filters. I told her about the board, my mother's threats, the corporate sabotage. I told her that staying beside her might cost me everything I had built. She was quiet for a while. Then she looked up at me with those fire-worn eyes and asked, "And what do you want?" It was a simple question, but it stripped me bare. Because for the first time, I didn't want legacy. I didn't want board seats or polished press releases. I wanted to be the kind of man who didn't abandon someone just because she was inconvenient to love. I want you to be safe, I finally said. And I want to be the one who doesn't run when it gets hard. She studied me carefully, like she was trying to decide if she believed me. Then she stood up and walked over, placed her palm against my cheek. "Then you'd better start choosing differently," she whispered. And I knew she was right. Saving Z couldn't just be about shielding her. It had to be about confronting the world that hurt her, and admitting I had once been part of it. It happened on a Monday morning. I was sipping coffee in my office when my phone vibrated with a dozen simultaneous alerts. A blog had dropped an exclusive. A photo of Z, years ago, barely 22, half-dressed, bruised, sitting on a hospital bed. The accompanying story was vile, spun from truth, twisted by malice. They called her a paid mistress, a scheming dropout, accused her of attempting suicide to manipulate her abuser. The comments were worse. No wonder she ended up homeless. She used to be pretty until the streets chewed her. Is this who our billionaires are kissing now? I felt my hands shake in fury, but it was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside me when I realized the leak could only have come from a medical record, one she told me had disappeared. Someone had dug into her past, stripped it of all context, and hung it online like a corpse for the city to mock. I rushed home, but Z was gone. The burner phone was on the floor, cracked. Her small bag was missing. My heart dropped. I searched all day. I checked Mama Tope's safe house, the soup kitchens, the bus parks she used to haunt. Nothing. I paid a street boy who claimed to have seen her near Yaba, but it led nowhere. That night, drenched in rain, I sat in my car outside the very alley I first saw her. And I prayed. I, a man who negotiates with silence, begged God out loud. Not for forgiveness. Just for her life. When I finally found her, curled behind a discarded mattress behind a printing press in Acadia, she looked up at me like I was a ghost. Her face was blank, her voice brittle. "It's happening again," she said. "They're killing me again." I didn't try to explain. I didn't offer solutions. I simply sat beside her in the dirt. After a while, I reached out and took her hand. And this time, she didn't pull away. She let me hold it. I didn't know if it meant she forgave me for the chaos that followed that kiss. But I knew she was still fighting to live. And that meant I couldn't back down, not now. Not ever. I don't remember the exact words I used when I apologized. I just remember it was the first time I cried in front of someone without shame. I told Z the truth, that even though I meant to protect her, the kiss was still a kind of violence. That my lie, though well-intended, had triggered a domino effect I couldn't control. That I thought my name could protect her, when in fact, it had dragged her deeper into danger. She didn't speak for a long time. Just stared at me like she was searching for something beneath my skin. Then she said softly, "You're not the only man who lied. But you're the first one who stayed to clean the mess." That broke me a little more. Because I realized she didn't need me to be perfect. She just needed me to be real. To see her without trying to fix her. To stand with her without hiding her. To love her without asking her to make it easier. We stayed in a hotel for a few days after that. Somewhere quiet, hidden. Not because we were afraid, but because Z needed stillness. I watched her slowly come back to herself, bit by bit. She started cooking again, humming occasionally, folding towels with military precision. One afternoon, I caught her reading an old newspaper and sketching her own headlines in the margins. "Survivor rebuilds. Woman reclaims name." They didn't break her. I didn't interrupt. I just watched, overwhelmed by how deeply I admired her. Not as a project. Not as a mystery. But as a person who had rebuilt herself from ash and still chose to trust me. She wasn't in love with me. Not yet. Maybe never. But we had something sacred, partnership. And in that quiet hotel room with flickering lights and cheap curtains, I made her a promise, not with my lips, not with my money, but with my presence. I would walk with her, not in front. And when the storm came, I wouldn't be the one hiding behind a lie. I'd be the man who finally told the whole truth. The plan was simple in theory, dangerous in execution. Z would testify, on record, on camera. We'd expose Bashir Adelik and the network that covered his tracks. My PR team thought I was insane. My legal team warned that retaliation could be severe. My mother sent me a message that simply said, "If you do this, don't expect forgiveness." I read it and deleted it. I was done choosing silence. Z and I sat across from a journalist we both trusted, an older woman who had once been blacklisted for exposing a senator's trafficking ring. She asked hard questions. Z didn't flinch. She told her story. Every word. Every bruise. Every cover-up. My name came up too. Not as a villain. Not as a hero. Just as a man who lied and then stayed. When the story aired, the internet split like a fault line. Some praised Z. Others dragged her. But this time, she had a voice. And this time, I stood beside her. No scripts. No apologies. Just truth. We held a press conference days later. Bashir's lawyers threatened us. A few anonymous emails warned of consequences. My board tried to distance the company. My mother called one final time. "Withdraw the statement," she said. "Say she lied. Save yourself." I didn't respond. I walked onto the stage, took the mic, and looked directly into the crowd. "Months ago, I said something that wasn't true," I began. I said, "She is my wife," to stop 3 men from hurting a woman they thought had no protection. I paused, letting the silence settle. Today, I say it again. But this time, with no lie in my mouth. She is my wife. Not legally. Not romantically. But in every way that matters. Because I have chosen her. Her truth. her fight, her dignity. Even when the world refused to. The room went quiet. Cameras flashed. And beside me, Z's hand found mine. This time, without hesitation. The fallout was brutal. My position at the company was suspended pending an internal review. Major partners pulled out of key deals. Bashir filed multiple lawsuits. My mother cut me off completely, her silence louder than any insult. For weeks, it felt like everything I'd built was burning. But I didn't run. I didn't hide. I showed up. Every day. I attended hearings. I answered questions. I protected Z's space. I watched as other women began to speak out. Not all of them were believed. But a crack had opened. And from that crack, something new began to grow. Z moved into my apartment, not because she needed a roof, but because she chose not to sleep alone anymore. We lived quietly. No social media. No public appearances. Just us. Slowly learning each other. She started a blog, writing anonymously. I started working with a local NGO that helped survivors navigate the legal system. We both found purpose not in perfection, but in persistence. And then one morning, she came into the room holding a ring. A plain silver band. She didn't say anything. Just handed it to me. I looked at her, confused. You want me to? She shook her head, smiling softly. No, she said. I want you to wear it. Not because we're married, but because it's time the world sees who you are becoming. I slid the ring on my finger. No fanfare. No ceremony. Just two people, wrecked and rebuilt, sitting in the aftermath of truth. That evening, I stood on our small balcony, watching the city breathe. The same city that tried to bury her. That tried to silence me. That now had to live with both of us refusing to vanish. And I whispered the words again, only to myself this time. She is my wife. Not because of a kiss. Not because of a lie. But because I finally understood, love isn't power. Love is presence. And I was done protecting my name. Now, I protect her peace.